Hey guys, Aaron here from ACGC Gaming and welcome to my review on Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Some of you may have noticed that in my previous reviews they've been a bit jumbled and not very organised, so today I'm trying something a little different. I'll be doing a little intro followed by 5 different topics and finally finishing off with my thoughts and conclusions. The individual areas I'll be addressing are the story, gameplay and controls, graphics, sound effects and music, and finally how it runs on my computer. And if you like this new format, please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up or comment down below. Right, so back in 2008, EA DICE introduced Mirror's Edge to the world, an almost completely new concept that divided a lot of gamers. Here, we had a first-person, action-adventure, parkour-driven alternative to the likes of Assassin's Creed, and it promised so much. Arguably, it fell quite short of what it could have been, with plenty of bugs, fiddly controls, closed off tight environments and poor signposting. In my eyes, it kind of served as a proof of concept, a framework you might say for something that could have been truly amazing. Now here we are, 8 years later with the reboot, and a lot of people, including me, wanted this. Does it live up to the potential that we saw back then? Let's find out. Okay, so set in the showcase city of Cascadia, the City of Glass, Mirror's Edge Catalyst sees the return of the female protagonist Faith Connors. If you don't know much about the game or Faith, it's pretty much the basic hero backstory. Her parents got killed while she was really young, her sister supposedly suffocates on a gas grenade while they're both trying to escape, and that led to her being raised by Noah, the leader of the free-running group known as the Cabal, and in turn rebelling against the system. Faith started to work for the black market boss Dogan on the promise of a drawing done by her late mother. She eventually took a job to steal a prototype vaccine from a fellow runner called Celeste. However, after learning that she in fact stole it to save the life of her sister, Faith surrendered to the KSEC forces in remorse. Dogan used his leverage within the city to have Faith's sentence severely reduced, and how do I know this, you may ask? Because it's not really explained clearly in the game at all. It's actually from the comic released and sold separately from the game called Mirror's Edge Exordium, and that acts as a kind of prequel to Catalyst. The game does give you some very short flashbacks in the second half of the story, but it doesn't really do a great job of explaining what happened. And that's a huge problem for me, as I love games with a good story. As far as the actual story within the game, there is something there. Faith is on a mission to pay off old debts to Dogan and stop the conglomerates from taking over the city and brainwashing everyone. But it feels like the developers planned for a lot more. Kind of like the feeling that everyone got when Destiny came out. If you do go back to the story trailer for Catalyst from E3, most of the scenes are from the end game content, and some of which don't actually appear within the game. Well, not that I've seen anyway. Couple this with the fact that DICE have introduced so many new characters but have failed to build and develop on who they are, just leads you to think what could have been. For example, in the comics, Birdman is such an important character, but he's only given 5 minutes of screen time in the game. And little things like, within the first 10 minutes, you get the hint that Icarus is going to be a massive character, his name linking to mythology, Project Icarus in the first Mirror's Edge game, and the fact that Noah tells you that he runs better than anyone. All of this, and he's basically relegated to the person who teaches you how to use your gadgets. Overall, I feel that the story could use a little bit more work, and it just seems rushed. It's the same old story of there being plenty of potential, but either that not being recognised by the developer or not being given enough time. So after emerging from a stint in Juvie, Faith meets up with Icarus, a new runner sent from Noah to cut Faith's grid link and to hook her up to the runner's augmented reality system using a device they refer to as the Beat Link. That allows Faith to communicate with other runners and use runners' vision. To learn the controls, you basically do a quick tutorial, which is basically running back to the safe house and completing some augmented reality training drills. In my opinion, it's quite a good way of getting to know the basic controls, I haven't really played with the controller, but the controls on mouse and keyboard are quite simple. They follow the standard setup of WASD to move, space to jump, control to crouch, slide, roll, E to talk to people, and Q and F to use certain abilities. Oh, and obviously the mouse to look around. Now, the massive thing that sets Mirror's Edge Catalyst apart from its predecessor is the move from a linear corridor-driven game to a more open-world game. It gives you a hell of a lot more freedom to explore and zip across the rooftops, and in my opinion, it's worked really well. It adds a new layer of design to the game, and in my opinion, is something that was quite heavily wanted after playing the original. There are side missions, time trials, and other small things you can do to fill time between missions, but it doesn't really add anything to the game other than unlocking a few extra save houses. Now, back to the runner's vision. This is one of the best mechanics in the game. It really adds to the flow, and by giving you a wispy red trail to follow, it means you don't necessarily have to think about where you're going, and it allows you the freedom to just run. However, it can also be a downside, as you sometimes forget that you can take alternative routes and can become over-reliant upon that feature, especially when you come to the gridlock missions within the game, where it automatically turns off the runner's vision and you suddenly have to think again, having to actively study the environment to figure out how you will reach the objective. It brings a nice fresh approach. Unfortunately, those types of missions are the exception and not the rule. Most of the time you'll find yourself running from one place to another, normally in the quickest time possible, and you never really stop to pay attention to the beautifully white, futuristic scenery around you. The main thing that I haven't been particularly impressed with in the game is the fighting mechanics. It's the one part of the game that doesn't feel fluid, if you know what I mean. The fluidity and grace that Faith has when traversing the rooftops all but disappear when in combat, and you're left with the whole thing feeling a little bit clunky, for want of a better word. It's definitely something that should be improved greatly if EA DICE create a sequel in the future. Right, okay, so we've covered the story and the gameplay, so let's go on to the graphics. This is something that divided people's opinion greatly. There's some that believe the minimalistic appearance in the City of Glass is boring, bleak, lifeless, but if you'd have asked me how I thought the future would look like, then the clean, sterile environment that Catalyst puts forward isn't far off what I'd be thinking. Maybe I've watched Minority Report too many times or something, I don't know. The random bursts of colour do keep things interesting, and the clear divide in the areas of the map do give some variation. Also, while running around the rooftops, there are some other things to see, like other runners practicing their skills. If you look down from the rooftops, you'll see cars driving past, and there's also some lovely sights to behold. As Ferris Bueller would say, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Now, the actual textures in the game, they aren't the best. Considering the game is using the Frostbite engine that's also used in Star Wars Battlefront and the Battlefield series, I expected a lot more. That's not to say there isn't some nice touches though, like jumping from one building to the next and seeing a shadow appear beneath you, swinging past glass buildings and seeing your reflection looking back at you, and just the general feeling you get from looking down from the top of one of the many skyscrapers within the game. In terms of the character models, they do look pretty good, and they've definitely come a long way since the first game. Now, there are 5 different graphics presets within the game: low, medium, high, ultra, and hyper. Yes, hyper settings. Settings above ultra. I mean, what the f***?
It's over 9,000!
The main difference as you jump up through the levels are pretty standard. More anti-aliasing, better lighting effects, and more particle effects. Overall, I think the game does look pretty good, but I think it could have looked quite a bit better if they took the time. So onto the music and sound effects. Now, I've got to say, I absolutely loved the music in the first game. It had a distinct electronic soundtrack which complemented the gameplay incredibly. Catalyst takes a slightly different approach to the music however, and it goes for a more subtle and calming approach, with songs adding warmth to the game. Like I say, it's quite different, but it still does seem to suit the game. The sound effects are as good as ever, if not better than its predecessor. It may be my new headphones, but you can hear everything that's going on. Whether it's the footsteps, squeaks from your trainers as you run over the slick floor, every punch, kick, land or roll, they've all been recorded incredibly, and they really add to the first person experience of Catalyst. And finally, I think that even the voice acting is pretty good. It gives a bit of emotion to the cutscenes and gameplay, and it does help improve what little story there is. Now, so how did it run on my machine? As some of you know from my review of Battlefield 1 Open Beta, my rig isn't that bad, and it probably isn't much of a surprise that I was able to run this game on hyper settings without a problem. I kept VSync enabled and I had a constant 60 frames per second. That leads me to believe that the game is pretty well optimised, and I don't see why a mid-level graphics card shouldn't be able to play this game on at least high settings at 1080p. I did find that if I unticked the option called Disable Memory Restriction, that led to random moments in the game where it would pause for about half a second. I don't know why that is, as my GPU was never being fully utilised, so I left this ticked just to make sure I got a smooth run. So, in conclusion, how do I feel about Mirror's Edge Catalyst? Well, I've tried to be a little bit on the fence with this one, as there's quite a few things wrong with the game. The lack of decent storyline, especially for an open world game, the poor combat system, and the sheer fact the game feels like it's had a lot of content chopped just to make a deadline. But in spite of these downfalls, chaining free-running moves across the rooftops, climbing skyscrapers and taking part in some of the cool level designs has led me to still have fun, to the point where I actually bought the game instead of just playing the EA Access trial version. If you were a fan of the first title, then it's probably worth picking up at some point, especially if you can get it in a sale for around 10 quid, like I did, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed at that price. It really does give a refreshing and unique feel to the first person genre, and it's something that I had been looking forward to for quite a while. As always guys, thank you very much for watching and I hope you liked it. If you've got any suggestions, or if you did actually like this style of review, or if you want me to go back to the old style, please comment down below or send me a message on any of my other social media accounts. Feel free to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Have fun guys, and I'll see you soon. Take care.